One of the ways we often start when we do a forest walk is I start by asking people to consider a relationship that they've had sometime in their life with either a tree or a bunch of trees. And it's often when we're starting out on a walk, we meet in a parking lot somewhere, and then as we walk out to where we're going to start the walk, I get them to share with each other their story of themselves in a tree. And since we can't really do that tonight uh, with the whole group, I'm going to share my story with you of a tree. And my story starts really when I was a young boy. I think probably I spent a lot of my life out in the woods with the other boys. We lived in a time. I'm 80 plus years old now, so I lived in a time when kids had free run. we we were the free run kids, and we didn't have parents on top of us or taking us everywhere. So I spent a lot of my time on bicycles or walking, meeting my friends in the woods or the forests, or out on, when I lived in Saskatchewan, out on the prairies. Around most of the farms, there were hedgerows of trees because they had to do something to protect themselves from the wind. They were usually poplars, and poplars or trembling aspens are trees that are very noisy because they tremble all in the slightest breeze. And so I can remember from very much as a young child going out and listening to the trees in the forest. But when I was 12 years old, my mother died, and a few months later, my brother died as well. And at that particular time, the trees became very important for me, so important that later in life, I wrote a poem about it. So this is my story that I would share with you in the form of a poem about trees. And the poem is about Spring Bush. This is actually a picture of Spring Bush. It's in a little town just south of Ottawa. And this is the spring part of it. And you can see the cedar trees all around. And those were the trees that I used as I tried to heal myself after the during the grieving period after my mother and my brother died. So this is the story that I wrote for myself, and I'm sharing with you. It seems several lifetimes since I left this place, and yet this place has never left me. Soulful moments still summon up her warm embrace, my mind's cool and quiet sanctuary. Sun glints on bubbling water as it sings its way, a dance down moss-clad stairs of limestone beneath a cedar canopy that cools the day and shields both fern and frog from burning sun. Time stops as, owlishly perched in high cedar bough, a boy watches hikers cross the glen, embraced by swaying treetop arms that hold him now and teach a grieving son to breathe again. Through the trees, the sledding hills of winter daring bid him wonder whether Devil's Trail was no accidental toboggan hill naming, but proof of who really was in control. Not just a childish metaphor for how chaotic ice-slick 60-degree slopes can be while hurtling down with nothing to save you but luck in a quest for 15 minutes of fame. The brook's laughter reawakens joy he once knew, lost when the universe broke faith with him and stole his mother and then took his brother too, without apology or explanation. Warm breezes breathe in rhythms gently matching his. Trees sigh the tears he cannot unearth, while scents of cedar mixed with musty earthiness prove death's decay gives way to life's rebirth. Years pass. The boy moves on, acquires a manly face, but still, when plagued by rush and worry, spring bush with her waters and cedar's warm embrace gives mind cool and quiet sanctuary. So we begin there, and then we move on. 65 years after that, you have me just before COVID hit our world, recently widowed, isolated by COVID-19 in a new apartment after having just sold my house, trying to learn how to live as a single person after all those 50 plus years of being married. And suddenly the only activity that I was allowed anywhere was with my dog walking outside. And so I walked. We walked, the dog and I, as did many other people, and discovered the out of doors again. It was the end of summer that I came back from a cottage where I'd been for a month, not too far away from where Charmaine lives and Linda. And then I said to myself, okay, what do I do now? It's still COVID time. There's not much I can do around here. And just at that point, I was on the computer one day and I saw an ad for forest therapy guiding course. And I thought, I don't even know what that is, but it sounds really neat. So I phoned the number that was on the ad, and I said, is it okay if somebody who's 79 years old joined your course? Because it seemed to be a course for people who wanted to make a living at it. And I wasn't about to do that, but I was intrigued to learn how to do it properly. And they said, oh, we'd love to have you. Your perspective will be very rich for the rest of us who are, from a very different generation. So I went to an 8-day intensive, all of us wearing masks, all the COVID protocols in place. And after the 8-day intensive, participated in 7 months of supervised practice, where I had to write in a journal every day. I had to do research on certain kinds of plants that might make tea that nobody would die from when you served it to them. I had to research different kinds of animals and birds. I had to draw pictures. It's been years since I had done any artwork, but that was all part of the process of helping us relate to it. And finally, I finished my 7-month program and had written all the papers that were required. And at the end of April, in fact, I got the certificate and the announcement that I had graduated as a certified forest therapy guide on my 79th birthday, which I celebrated in Peru just at the beginning of a hike up the Inca Trail toward Machu Picchu. It was kind of an ironic thing because I had spent 7 months learning how to slow down and wander through the woods about the same time as I was beginning a 4-day trip that was about as rushed as one could ever imagine a hiking trip through the mountains could be, in drop-dead gorgeous country that really deserved to have several weeks spent wandering through it instead of 4 short days. But anyway, so that's where I was, and I graduated as a forest therapy guide from the Global Institute of Forest Therapy. There are forest therapy associations in a variety of countries, and and different ones. So there probably is one in Australia. I know there's one in Great Britain. The Global Institute of Forest Therapy is also in Great Britain. I know that in California, there's a very large association of forest therapy guides as well that get training and certification there. And so one of the things that happened was, as part of the practice and learning how to be a guide and practicing guiding, you had to find what they called a sit spot. And it could be anywhere you wanted, but for me, it was with a tree. And this is my tree. I call her Teresa. Teresa is an ironwood or an American hornbeam, hop hornbeam, if you like. That's the more proper name. But I think hornbeam really comes from the fact that it was a piece of wood that was hard enough that you could put it around the neck of an ox, and the ox wouldn't break the wood. It was that hard. So that's why ironwood was used for that. Anyway, so this is Teresa, and I spent many hours, still do. Teresa is my home spot whenever I'm feeling like I need to heal my soul a little bit. I go out and spend an hour or maybe an hour and a half just sitting near this tree and letting the forest hug me, I guess is the best way to put it. Just being there, trying to be part of it and be in it. So that's how I began and how I got involved in this practice. I am a forest therapy guide, but I really became a guide so that I could be better at practicing it for myself. But I do take groups out. I offer a trip usually once a month to whoever is interested, and people come and join me, and we go out for a forest therapy walk. So, what is forest therapy? Well, it's really, if you want to put it in simple terms, a modern day rediscovery of something that our ancestors all knew about. It was something they took for granted, which was the relationship they had with nature. Really, the Industrial Revolution is what has separated us as human beings from nature. And but before that, pretty much all of our ancestors spent a good part of their day and of their lives in relationship to the forests and the woods that surrounded them. Forest therapy is called Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing in Japan. Now, when I first heard the term forest bathing, I had connotations of people running around naked in the forest, jumping into pools of water and things like that. But I think bathing, in the sense that the Japanese use it, means bathing yourself in the goodness of the forest, is really what they mean by that. Sometimes I've heard it called forest immersion therapy, immersing yourself in the forest in order to heal. I know in Canada, there is a program in several provinces now called PARX, P-A-R-X, which is a form of prescription that general practitioner doctors are able to prescribe to their patients as an alternative to medications, because the evidence suggests that spending time in a forest is often as good or as effective as many of the medications that would be the alternatives to that. So those are some of the things that have happened as a result of the science and the research that's been done. Most of the science started in Japan in the 80s. The Japanese had a real crisis on their hands in their healthcare system, because they had huge numbers of their population that were were sick and dying from what they thought were stress-related diseases and environmental related diseases. And so they decided to do some research to try and find out why that was happening and why it was that certain people within their population didn't get sick, didn't seem to have the same kind of problems as other people. And what they discovered was that nature was the common link for the people that were healthy in Japan compared to the others. And so they began to do some very focused research in that area. And what they discovered was that spending time in nature made people healthier. Now, for a lot of us, that's just instinctive. We sort of know that. But the Japanese were intent on making sure that it was scientifically validated. And so they developed a whole bunch of research techniques that allowed them to go through this and find out. And what they found was that stress, heart health, blood pressure, cognitive functioning, and mental health were all improved when people spent time in a forest. The research that they did, quite groundbreaking research, and in the first book on the book list that I'll show you at the end is the book by the person who led the research, and we'll give you all the information if you want to read further on that. But the research resulted in the practice, which has now become a central part of their national health program, which is called Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing. And all across Japan, you will find forests that are particularly set aside now for forest therapy or forest bathing, with trails that are all mapped out and have little signs that help individuals go. So you don't have to have a guide to take you. You can go and practice, follow the signs, and do whatever the invitations at each post suggest. And it's a way of doing a therapy program that you can do for a weekend, for a week, sometimes just for a day. And that's a basic part of their program. And as I said, that has spread all over the world now, so that there are doctors in various parts of Canada, at least, and I think also in the States. And I don't know about Australia, or I don't know in England as well. Doctors are able to prescribe a park pass that you can buy, and that becomes your medication or your therapy as over against medications. So what's the science of this? The first thing we know is that when you go out in the forest, you've probably noticed it. The first thing that happens when you go out in the forest, you notice that the air smells different. Those differences in smell are basically what we call phytoncides. And the phytoncides are airborne tree medicines that the trees naturally give off in their attempt to ward off insects, bacteria, and fungal infections that might otherwise make them sick. And because human beings evolved as forest creatures, part of our evolutionary background is that we too respond to those same phytoncides. And that's what we've discovered, especially the ones from evergreens and oak trees. What the scientists have now discovered is that many of those phytoncides stimulate the autoimmune system in the human being and produce elevated levels of what are called natural killer cells, which are cells that can attack tumors in the body or virus-infected cells in the body and eliminate them from the body. These there's a correlation between the time that is spent in a forest and how long the effect lasts. So if you spend 3 hours in the forest, apparently it'll boost your immune system for 7 days by about 50%. And if you spend 3 days, it can boost your immune system by that 50%, and it'll last for a month. So that's one of the things that we know happens. And so whenever you go in the forest and take that first deep breath, what you're doing is just that instinctive, natural breathing in of the aromas or the chemicals that the forest is naturally producing, which we naturally respond to by getting healthier. The second thing, nature sounds. How many of you have ever listened to ocean waves or something as a way of going to sleep at night? Or, you sometimes notice when, I mean, a couple of you at least are birders, and somebody else was saying they have birds they're attracting, but it's the noise, the sound, listening to the sound of the wind through the trees, listening even just to the, as I mentioned, as a child, listening to the wind through the trembling aspens, and the way that today I was out in the woods and we were listening to the groaning of one tree as it swayed against another. One's leaning against the other and the trees talking to each other. At one point we thought maybe one of the trees was even going to fall down, but they were just sighing together as they were there. Those sounds have been found to reduce blood pressure and increase heart rate variability, to create an overall sense of well-being and improve cognitive functioning and cognitive focus. And actually, by listening to nature sounds, it's been shown that human beings have a higher level of creativity and they're able to sleep better. Not bad things just for listening to the sounds of nature all around us. So those are things that science has discovered that nature sounds do for us. Another one is fractals, and that's I for years used the phrase the microcosm is the macrocosm, but it's fractals are those patterns that are found in nature that are found in the microscopic as well as the cosmic level. So what we have in the picture that I've shown you, I'm showing you, is an X-ray of lungs and a picture of a tree branch. And I think there's a remarkable similarity between those two things. And if you think about it, there should be, because the lungs are how human beings breathe, and the leaves are on the branches. That's how trees breathe. And so if you think about it, we're looking at the lungs of a human and the lungs of a tree. And those fractals, those repeating patterns, are patterns that visually human beings recognize, and the visual stimulus of seeing those fractals actually helps to rebalance the functions of the human body, according to the science. Naturescapes, even if only viewed through a window, can help to make us feel better. One of the experiments that they did to discover this was based on some anecdotal evidence that had come from some nurses in a surgical recovery unit of a hospital, where they had a ward of 8 beds of patients, and 4 of them were along a back wall, and 4 of them were along a wall by the windows. And the nurses just got used to the fact that the patients who came out of surgery and were placed in the beds that were by the windows always got better faster and got sent home sooner than the patients who were in the beds against the wall. And so they started doing investigations and research to find out why. And the why of it was simply that the ones who had windows were able to look outside and see the patterns of nature that were outside, even though they weren't outside themselves. Just the visual look at it actually um, sped up their recovery by 2 to 3 days in terms of being able to go home after surgery. Um, so that was one of the things that they discovered, and they continued to do research into showing how human beings looking at natural patterns um, end up feeling better than people who don't. We have a new phrase that sometimes gets thrown around. It's called vitamin G, G for ground. And it has to do with touching the ground or being in touch with the ground. By being in touch with the ground, we seem to get in touch with some kind of electromagnetic field of energy in the earth. And that actually rebalances our own physical and mental rhythms. I don't understand this. I'm just telling you what the research seems to indicate. But it puts us more in harmony with ourselves and with our bodies and our minds and our emotions. And we seem to be more in the here and now and less in the there and then when we're in touch with the ground. So that's what vitamin G is about. The other term that got coined by a researcher back in 2006 was nature deficit disorder. And what he found was that being out in nature had a remarkable effect on reducing the impacts of attention deficit disorder in children. And that nature walks were one of the ways in which people who struggled with attention deficit disorder could normalize and feel well and get better. So it's become a catch-all term for stress-related diseases and attention deficit disorder symptoms that can be improved through forest immersion therapy. So anyway, so those are some of the scientific elements. There's many more, but it gets a little bit boring, and I'm not an expert, a scientific expert, but I just thought it was important to know that there is some very basic scientific evidence that seems to be indicating that we need to spend more time in the outdoors if we want to be healthy human beings. One of the fascinating experiments they did in Japan was they took people who were fitness buffs, and some of them were fitness buffs who spent all their time in the gym doing weightlifting and on the rowing machines and the treadmills and all those kinds of things. And the other group were a group who went out to the local park across the road from the office and did qigong or various kind of exercises in the park. And they discovered that the people they were all physically fit, but the ones who were in the park had a statistically significant better overall sense of health or experience of health than the ones who only did their fitness in a gym. So those are the kinds of things that they have established as a basis for forest therapy. Now, the magic of it all is to take all these scientific elements and try to figure out how to turn them into gold, which is what happens when you actually practice it and use it. And that's what a forest therapy walk is about trying to find how this ancestral wisdom, which we've lost because we burned all the witches who were really the women who knew about how the forest could heal us. And we destroyed all the people who, or discredited all the people who had this wisdom back when it was available to us. The only place that we really have found it that it's left is with our indigenous populations. And to the extent that we haven't destroyed their oral traditions or destroyed their cultures, there's still some of that wisdom that we can gain back, and we're beginning to do that now and collect it. So that's been with forest therapy guides in Canada. We spend a lot of time. Just a minute, I got it myself out of here. Okay, we spend a lot of time listening to the indigenous people tell us their stories and their understandings of their relationship to the forest as a way of doing this. So one of the things that happens in a forest therapy walk is as soon as you get into the forest, we stop you, we ask you to just stand around, be very still, and then I invite you to become aware of your five senses. So I ask you to close your eyes and just smell whatever you smell around you. And then I ask you to listen and listen to the sounds around you. Then I ask you to touch and feel what's around you. And usually we don't ask you to taste things because there are a lot of things in the forest you shouldn't taste because they won't make you well, they'll make you sick. And so we try to avoid that, but occasionally I'll ask somebody, if you're very daring, you might want to lick a rock or something, just to get a feel of what it feels like to lick something that's safe enough to lick or to taste. Kids will eat dirt, or they'll eat a piece of grass or something, so kids have a natural affinity to do this. And then to touch things and to feel the different textures of things that are around you. And then to open your eyes and to look around you as if you are looking at something you've never seen before. And notice what you see beyond the things you've been trained to see as you look in the forest. So that's what sensory awareness is about. And then we might walk a little bit further in the forest, and I'll invite you to begin to think about the forest, not from an objective perspective, but from an animistic perspective, which is to say, to think of the forest as a community of living beings, of more than human beings, a collective of which you are a part, but which is full of living things. So it's not a tree as an object, but a tree as a 500-year-old wise woman, or a squirrel as a being who lives in the forest and is wondering why you've walked into his territory, and whether or not he should be afraid of you or trust you, or what he should do about it. And to begin to think of the forest as alive instead of as something to relate to, rather than something to treat as an object, or as something impersonal. So that's the animistic perspective. That was probably the hardest one for me, because I've been so well trained in the scientific attitude that I was really trained that was almost superstitious to think of trees that way. It was only after I named my tree Teresa that I began to realize that I could feel a personality, or I could feel a relationship, or as long as it was just a tree, nothing much was happening. But as soon as I allowed her to have a name, it was like her energy became available and accessible to me. So it really has to do with how we can learn to change our perspective when we're out in the forest, um, and make the forest something we walk into rather than something we walk through. A relaxed pace is an important part of this. This is my dog who has taught me more about forest therapy than the instructors I had, because my dog knows naturally how to walk at a smell space and walks through the forest, um, and finds delight in just about every tree or every rock or every uh, uh, muddy place that there is, and can stand there for 5 minutes just breathing it all in and still not have discovered everything that there is to discover there. And of course, while he's smelling and inhaling and learning about the forest from his perspective, I'm stuck there becoming aware of things in the forest I never noticed either. Uh, Today, I walked into the part of the forest and I was curious about something I saw over off the path, walked into the area to look at it, and suddenly found myself in the center of a whole uh, forest ground covered with a beautiful kind of mushroom that was just spreading everywhere in that forest and in that part of the forest, just alive with a whole bunch of things that I would never have noticed if I had just stayed on the path. So when you go in the forest, you do not go in order to uh, accomplish a certain number of steps. Um, I try to tell people, don't put your Fitbit on. Don't count. There's no 10,000 steps here, nor do they focus on getting to a destination. We're just going to wander in the forest. It may take us 3 hours and we may walk less than a kilometer, but we will discover a relationship or we'll have an experience with the forest that'll be entirely different than the experience you would have if you use the forest as a venue for getting your exercise, which is an entirely different, equally appropriate, but entirely different experience in forest therapy. An inquisitive attitude is something we also invite people to have when they're in the forest. Be curious. You know how sometimes you walk by something, you say, oh, that's interesting, but you keep walking? Well, in a forest therapy walk, you're invited not to keep walking, or to go back and take a look at whatever that is. Spend time with it. That cobweb that you happily avoided, go back and take a look at the magnificent design that some little insect has spent the last 3 days putting together in order to create a world in which they live and have their whole existence. And you can share it with them for a few minutes if you pause long enough to do that. Explore nature with curiosity and wonder, and new awarenesses and discoveries happen for you when you do that. And then every so often on a forest walk, we stop and we gather everybody together and we say, so what's alive in you from what we've experienced so far on our walk? What do you have that you'd like to share with everybody? And people can either share or they can just pass and say, and acknowledge that they don't want to share anything at that moment. We share around the circle. What happens is, in the richness of that sharing of experiences, that we reinforce each other's experiences, and we also expand each other's possibilities for then when we begin our walk again, other people can be looking for the things that somebody has noticed that perhaps they didn't notice. So it's a way that the group affirms what their experience has been so far, and then enriches each other by the sharing of it with one another. And it helps to concretize and integrate those experiences into an overall self-understanding that we have of what's happening for us in the forest. So that's a forest walk. It might take, as I said, 3 hours. We might walk a kilometer. We might, the longest I've ever done in a forest walk of 3 hours is about 2.5 kilometers, which is, for any of you who are walkers, you know, is a very slow pace. Walks are usually geared to the abilities of the people who are walking. So sometimes they're on entirely flat ground. They might be in an urban setting in a park. They would be places where people, if there are people in wheelchairs, you might have it be along a paved kind of park pathway, and have places that you would stop along there and invite people to experience. You can adjust it to anything. Forest therapy walks happen even in nursing homes. We bring potted plants in, or we bring branches or leaves or things from the forest and bring them in, and let's just pass them around, and people can have a form of forest therapy just by bringing the forest to them and giving them some opportunity to relate to things that they wouldn't be able to go out to. So those are the kinds of things that forest therapy is about. For those people who can get out into the forest, there are all the benefits, of course, of that I've described for that. So Mary Oliver, I don't know if any of you know her as a poet, but she's one of the favorites of people like me. And she writes a poem called When I Am Among the Trees. She says, when I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness, I would almost say that they save me and daily. I am so distant from the hope of myself in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, stay a while. The light flows from their branches, and they call again. It's simple, they say. And you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine. So, if we were to end a forest therapy walk, if this was a forest therapy walk, we'd end it now with a tea ceremony. But because I can't end it with a tea ceremony in which we would make some tea from something that had been harvested in the forest that we've just walked around in and are still in. We'd sit down together in a circle. We'd make a tea out of pine needles or sumac flowers, or goldenrod is a particularly nice tea, or dandelions. And then we'd all sip a tea and ingest, take into ourselves a piece of the forest and the forest chemistry and its energy, and that ceremony would be the way we would end our forest therapy walk. But because I can't do that, I'm going to instead finish off my little formal presentation with a blessing from Brother David Stendal-Ross. May you grow still enough to hear the small noises earth makes in preparing for the long sleep of winter, so that you yourself may grow calm and grounded deep within. May you grow still enough to hear the trickling of water seeping into the ground, so that your soul may be softened and healed and guided in its flow. May you grow still enough to hear the splintering of starlight in the winter sky and the roar at Earth's fiery core. May you grow still enough to hear the stir of a single snowflake in the air, so that your inner silence may turn into hushed expectation. So, thank you. This is I'll leave this on for a while, or at least it'll be on. I guess it's going to be recorded, isn't it? So it'll be on something that's available to you to check into afterwards if you like. But these are a number of books that you can read that all relate to the magic of what a forest has to offer to us as human beings to help us restore our own health, and not just our physical health, but also our mental health.